So I want to welcome all of you, alumni, students, friends of the iSchool. My name is Marty Hurst. I am currently the head of school. Come on in, welcome. And I'm here to welcome you and sort of kick off this celebration. For those of you who don't know me, I actually joined the School of Information 25 years ago as an assistant professor. Whoops, I'm using my mouse, so hold on. Find the mouse. There we go. All right. So my research areas are human-computer interaction, natural language processing, search user interfaces, and information visualization, especially right now. All right. That one. Okay. So today we're gathered in person for the first time in a couple of years for the 5th annual celebration of the founding of the first library program at UC. This building, we're also celebrating the 150th anniversary of this building, maybe give or take a year, maybe it's really next year that 150. Beautiful South Hall that we all love. As we know, it's the oldest building on the UC Berkeley campus. And I think we will all agree that those of us who teach and learn in here really love this building. It's a symbol of the school, and it's a very special and historic place. So I'm really pleased that we can get together and talk about, look at forward and back into where we're going and where we've been. So the driving force behind these birthday celebrations in 2018 was Professor Michael Buckland. He's seated right there. Here we see a photo of him in the middle when he started as the founding dean of the School of Librarian and Information Studies in 1976, when we were all seeing Star Wars. So at the 2018 event celebrating the first 100 years of the school, Michael gave a talk entitled "A Brief History of the School's Founding," which told the story of California in the early 20th century and how the school was born out of an incredible need for librarians and libraries, especially in rural areas. And if you didn't attend that talk, you can actually visit our website to learn more about it. And this included a cast of characters, the story, one of whom was the founding chair of the library school named Sidney Mitchell, who is shown on the left here. So in 1956, a fellowship was endowed to honor Sidney Mitchell, and it continues to provide vital support to our master's students, MIM students at the school today. And I mentioned this fellowship program not only because of its historic value, but to recognize the impact of our library alums, some of whom are here today, have made in the lives of these students. Can you hear me? Are you having trouble hearing me? Anyone? Okay. Because of their generous support. So I'm sure some of you in this room contributed to this effort. And so we could see that we have a scholarship recipient in the image here. One of these alumni donors was the Mitchell Scholarship recipient herself, and it's incredibly meaningful to have our alumni give back by paying it forward to the current generation of information students. And if you have any interest in joining this group of donors and being a part of Mitchell's legacy, please get in touch with Tia here. Or if you want to also talk to anyone at the front desk as well, if you can't find Tia. Tia is in charge, and we'd love to have you help to continue this worthy cause. All right, so the theme of this meeting this time around is change, apparently. So since those early days, the school has had different incarnations, and we've continually embraced change as it's happened because our field inherently is subject to enormous amounts of change. So as you probably know by now, the School of Information is a critical facet of the new Division of Computing, Data, and Society, which is known by its acronym CDSS. Pictured here is the current head of that division, Jennifer Chase, who's also the current dean of the school. CDSS is expected to become the first new college on this campus in a very long time. Of course, we know the School of Information was formed about 25 years ago after the library school. But this is going to be a college. This division, which is kind of a temporary organization before the college, was launched in July 2019 to make use of Berkeley's preeminence in research and excellence across disciplines to propel data science, discovery, education, and impact. And the iSchool is an integral part of CDSS, due in large part to the former deans that we've had here. And of course, just the fact that what we do is so relevant to its effort. In addition to the School of Information, CDSS is also home to an undergraduate major called Data Science. The Electrical Engineering and Computer Science Department is partly in CDSS and partly in the College of Engineering. And there's other units. It's kind of a melange of units. There's computational biology, there's a medical precision health, and some other smaller units that are a part of it. You might have seen this building if you went on Hearst Avenue or walked in the middle of campus. Well, you wouldn't have seen this building, you would have seen the hole in the ground where the building's going to be. I guess we see it in our imagination. This is the plan for the Gateway building, which is partly funded now. And you can see they've started, I guess they've started digging on it. I'm pleased to say that the iSchool will stay in South Hall, but will be a part of that, of course, and we'll be working with people who are in the Gateway building, and I'm sure there'll be lots of activities there. Another way we've changed recently is the creation of a Master's of Information and Cybersecurity program, which we know as MICS for short. And this degree is an online program, and it was established in response to the urgent need for highly skilled professionals who, among other things, help protect and secure the vast information landscape, including personal, governmental, commercial, and other data that are under constant threat from bad actors. So our MICS program recently was recognized by one of these things that recognize schools, but we don't really need that external recognition to know that we have really great students and really terrific faculty. And really it's a leading the way in an interdisciplinary approach to cybersecurity. That's how we differentiate as well from other programs that are out there. All right. So on the topic of cybersecurity, October is, believe it or not, National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I didn't know that, so I told you that. So I guess don't give out your password to someone you don't know this month. It's fitting then that we'll be taking a closer look at the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, also known as CLTC by its acronym. And Cleveland is here. She's the director, and she's going to give a talk, I think, in a little bit. As well as Professor Chris Hoofnagle, who's also in the back, telling you more about what's going on in that program. So I guess that's sort of the theme. All right, but before I introduce our first speaker, I want to acknowledge some early standard bearers of change and adaptation, at least one of whom is here. Those are our faculty emeriti at the School of Information. And while he couldn't be here today, founding CLTC faculty director Stephen Weber was largely responsible for establishing this. But I'd also like to just have anyone who was an emeriti faculty here in the room, just raise your hand so we can, applaud your being here. Just the two of you, Mary and Michael. I know, Michael, you didn't raise your hand. So thank you for being here. We're grateful for their help with shaping what the iSchool has been and what it's going to become in the future. So that's the end of my remarks. I think, do we have time for a question or two?
No questions so far.
Sure.
I was interested that CDSS has a dean, and what does that make the title for you as a head of the iSchool?
Well, it's complicated. My title is head of school. CDSS is a division, so it doesn't have a dean right now. It's a rather sort of temporary structure. And so it actually has an associate provost. At this time, that same person is also technically the dean of the School of Information. But there's going to be, when that college is formed, which will probably happen sometime in 2023, we'll have a dean of our own for the School of Information. We'll report to that person. Yes.
What is the difference between a college and a school?
Yeah. The question is, what's the difference between a college and a school? It's unusual for there to be a school and a college in the UC system, but we're going to have that. I would say that in this case, the college is kind of a holding company for a lot of different things, and the school is a coherent entity. All right, thank you very much for your attention. And the next speaker is, who is the next speaker?
Oh, it's in the.
It is? Oh, yes, sorry. Now it's my great pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Emma Frothingham, who is a processing archivist in special collections at Stanford. We won't make the noise. She holds a BA in history, music, and German from Beloit College and an MLIS with an emphasis on archives from Simmons University. And she'll be discussing the work and collections of alumnus Judy Young, MLS 68. So welcome.
You drive.
What?
You drive.
No. The slideshow.
Actually, let me drive.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary.
Well, thank you so much for having me here. Today, I'll be talking about Information School alumna Judy Young, who graduated in 1968, and her path from librarianship to what I'm calling an activist historian. Young used her work as a librarian and as a historian to provide a platform for those who had not been center stage in the historical narrative previously, namely Americans of Chinese descent, women, and immigrants. The photo here is one that she used as her author's photo on some of her later books. It shows her holding her father's immigration documents following his detention on Angel Island in the San Francisco Bay Area during the period of Chinese exclusion in the United States. Her father was detained for 34 days before entering the United States as a paper son. I spent about 3 months earlier this year processing Judy Young's papers, which mostly focused on her research and her writing as an academic. Preparing for this talk allowed me to spend a little bit more time looking into her early life, which was not featured as much in her papers. And I really appreciated getting to spend a little bit more time with her. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge Ben Stone, Stanford's curator for American and British history, who brought this collection to Stanford, Franz Kunst for his assistance in processing questions, and Judy Young's family and friends for their generosity in making this collection available to the public, which is an ongoing effort. Judy Young was born in San Francisco's Chinatown in 1946 to immigrant parents. She grew up in Chinatown and attended Galileo High School and San Francisco State University. Rather than talk about her early life and the role libraries played in it, I'd like to play a short video made by Young's friend and collaborator, Felicia Lowe. I'm only going to play the first 90 seconds of it, but Gary, let's get that up.
I met Judy 40 years ago when I started research on my film about Angel Island Immigration Station. Her willingness to share her knowledge and resources was immediate. Her generosity is legendary. What I didn't know is that her parents called her Daiung, number 5, as she was the 5th child of 6 born into the family. She developed her love for learning and books early on.
I remember going there for the first time with my grammar school class. That just opened a vista for me to explore the rest of the world from my protected environment in Chinatown. My parents refused to give me permission to get a library card because they were afraid that if I lost any of the books or they would have to pay for them. To get around that, I forged my parents' signature on the library card application. And I continued using that library every weekend and read just about every book I could in the children's room.
I was awestruck by Judy's commitment to Chinese literacy. She even turned down Lowell High for Galileo so she could stay in Chinese school through graduation. And she continued to study Chinese in college. Her ability to speak, read, and write Chinese served her well throughout her career. Judy.
Back to the slides, if possible. Following her education, Young got a job working as a reference librarian for the San Francisco Public Library. During this period, she crossed the bay to study for her library science degree here at Berkeley. She graduated in 1968 and spent the next 2 decades working in libraries. She also began to undertake some vast public history projects in the community, which I'll speak more on later. This public history work propelled her to return to UC Berkeley for a PhD and a second career in academia. She taught courses in American Studies at UC Santa Cruz for 14 years and continued her own research and published many books on Chinese American history well through her retirement. She also married Eddie Feng in 2003, who she had interviewed for one book and later became a subject for another book. She returned to Chinatown following Feng's death in 2018 and passed away in 2020. Focusing on Young's first career as a librarian, after only a few years as a reference librarian for the San Francisco Public Library, Young was appointed the head librarian of the Chinatown branch in 1973. This was the same library she frequented as a child and had forged her parents' signature to get a library card for. She was only 27 years old and was the first Chinese-speaking head librarian in the entire system. She also was the first of Chinese descent. During her time working in the Chinatown branch, she worked on building collections in a space specifically for the Chinese American community. In addition to building up collections in Chinese, this included hiring more bilingual librarians in the San Francisco Public Library system and providing materials for the community about citizenship and jobs. She continued her librarian career at the Oakland Public Library, where she headed the Asian Community Library as it opened in 1976. This library was unique at the time among public libraries in the US as it catered solely to the Asian American community with collections spanning 8 languages. Her role in the early days of the library included building collections from the ground up in Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Filipino languages, and Thai, as well as hiring staff that could provide services to those communities in those languages. The library not only served Oakland, but as the only library of its kind in the area, ended up serving the entire Bay Area. In a piece in American Libraries published by the ALA in 1973, soon after being hired by the Chinatown branch in San Francisco, Young said this: "Librarians are going to have to get out of their fortresses and talk with people about what the library has to offer." And then she truly took her own advice and she went to talk to people. While Young had been working in libraries, a park ranger at Angel Island in 1970 uncovered the poems that had been carved into the walls of the immigration station barracks, mostly by Chinese detainees. On the left, you can see a graph or an illustration of the immigration barracks, and the colors coordinate to which languages the poems are carved in. The red, which is, you can see is the most prominent, is Chinese. These carvings had been painted over many times, as you can see in the photo on the right. Young, together with historian Him Mark Lai and poet Jenny Lim, began to transcribe and translate the poems. On Young's side, she also conducted oral history interviews with around 50 individuals who had been detained on the island during the period of Chinese exclusion, including some who had carved poems. These translations and interviews were brought together in a book published by the three in 1980 called Island. The book is now in its 2nd edition, and work on the poem continues to this day. At the time the poems were discovered in 1970, the buildings of the immigration station on Angel Island were slated for demolition. Today, thanks to the work done by Young, Lai, Lim, and the advocacy of the Chinese American community on the West Coast, the poems and the buildings are a National Historical Landmark. Shortly after the publication of Island, Young received a grant from the Women's Educational Equity Program to conduct research and organize an exhibit on the experiences of Chinese American women. Over the next few years, Young coordinated a far-reaching project to assemble a corpus of information for the exhibit. This included conducting over 250 oral histories with women around the United States, gathering photographs of the Chinese American experience, and conducting archival research in institutions and historical societies around the country. Following the exhibit, Young brought her work together, publishing Chinese American Women, A Pictorial History. After her involvement with the Chinese Women of America project, Young returned to graduate school at UC Berkeley, where she wrote a dissertation on Chinese women in San Francisco. This dissertation became her next two books, Unbound Feet and Unbound Voices. During her academic career, Young was remarkably prolific. Her work focused on the experiences of everyday Chinese Americans, the same community she'd served as a librarian. She collaborated once again with Mark Lai and historian Gordon Chang to document the history of Chinese immigrants and Chinese Americans in California. Young wrote a book on San Francisco's Chinatown, where she'd grown up. She would take buses of her Santa Cruz students up there for walking tour field trips, and she encouraged her students to talk to their families and friends about their histories. She taught courses on oral history both at UC Santa Cruz as well as in the Santa Cruz area. She did that as well, writing about her family, writing a book about the life experiences of her husband, Eddie Feng, who had grown up in Chinatown and was a prisoner of war during World War II. Her final two books returned to Angel Island, one looking at non-Chinese immigrants that had come through the island, and one looking specifically at the Chinese Exclusion Act and Angel Island. All of her books are available through the UC Berkeley library system. I did check. I'd now like to speak a little bit about her legacy and lasting impact. From my perspective as a processing archivist, it was incredibly clear that even as she moved away from traditional librarianship, her librarianness remained with her. For one thing, there were a lot of photos of her cats in the collection. And more importantly, this was just an incredibly organized collection. As you can see here, this is a box of one of the many cassette tape boxes of her interviews. And it's very neatly labeled. Every tape has a name, a recording location, and she had also developed a numbering system linking the cassette tapes to the paper files that she kept. So it was all just incredibly organized and kind of a dream processing project. She continued to use libraries extensively in her academic research. Her collection at Stanford is largely made up of research files she assembled from archives and libraries, mostly around California. The collection essentially is a library of primary source materials about the Chinese American experience during the 20th century. Following the historian Mark Lai's death in 2009, Young was also involved in efforts to rename the Chinatown branch of the San Francisco Public Library in his honor. Lai and Young had collaborated on the Angel Island Poetry Project as well as later projects. The library had played a large role in both of their childhoods in Chinatown, and it is the same library that Young led in the 1970s. Possibly most importantly, she really made sure that all of her work is out there for people to access even through this day. Her research is in libraries, her books are out in libraries and bookstores around the Bay Area. I've definitely seen them ever since I processed this collection. And if you read her writing, it really doesn't feel like a history book. It feels much more like a discussion with a relatable person talking about tangible events and places. Her legacy is also very widespread in the Bay Area. Here you can see some of the places that are impacted by Judy's work just around us. On Angel Island, you can still view the poems on the walls that she helped translate. She was involved in creating the exhibits that you see as you wander through the immigration station buildings. In San Francisco's Chinatown, the Chinese Culture Center of San Francisco, where the Chinese Women of America project was based, is still active. The libraries she worked in are still running, and her book on Chinatown can be found in most bookstores with a local history section. Here at UC Berkeley, we are talking about her legacy at the iSchool, and over at the Ethnic Studies Library, collections from her early research and dissertation are housed. Down in Oakland, the Asian Community Library she helped found still serves the community every day and in many languages. It's had to move locations a couple times because it's grown to serve an even larger community. Down on the coast at UC Santa Cruz, oral histories conducted by her students in American Studies are a part of the library collections. And in the past 2 years since her passing, scholarships in Asian American Studies have been set up in her name. At Stanford, we house not only the Judy Young papers, but also the papers of many other Asian American activists and figures in the Bay Area history. All the collections are open to researchers and the public. Finally, as I was concluding the processing of this collection, we were really excited to learn from Young's family that she'd been included in a new mural in Chinatown, honoring Asian American Pacific Islander community heroes. The mural is on the corner of Jackson Street and Grant Avenue, and front and center in the striped shirt is Judy Young. Thank you.
So if anyone has questions, please ask them now. And
So how did the collection come to Stanford and not Santa Cruz?
I actually am not 100% sure. I was hoping that Ben Stone, who's the curator brought the collection in, would be here to talk about that. So I'm sorry, I don't have a clear answer on that.
Are all the photos and other items in the collection indexed on the web so that we know what is there?
They are in the process of being digitized. There were over 800 cassette tapes and media pieces that were in this collection, and work on getting those digitized is in progress. I did make a very large spreadsheet that I sent over to our digitization production group. So it's in progress, but it's not complete at the moment.
and will these be on the web once everything's digitized, accessible to everyone?
Yes, they'll be available through the Stanford Digital Repository, which you do not need a Stanford user ID to access. Yeah.
I'm curious about anybody in the room that knew her. I actually didn't work with her at the Chinatown branch. I worked in other locations with the San Francisco Library, but I served on committees with her. And I knew her for a long time. She was with San Francisco Library. And I actually was, I'm not sure if I was the first, but for years and years and years, I was the only Asian librarian who was like in charge of a department at the main library, considering it San Francisco Public Library. And I had a hard time getting that job because they thought I was too quiet and shy to supervise. And my staff protested and supported me. And I talked to the chief of the main library at that time. And so I did get the job. And Judy, she was wonderful. She did a lot for the library in Angel Island. And my father was also a paper son and also was detained. So. What is his name? Well, back then I was Shirley Chan and I'm Shirley McLaughlin now. Oh, Yeah.
When I was in library school, pardon, I can't get that out of my vocabulary. In 1976, Judy invited me to do my library internship at the Asian branch of Brooklyn. So I did that for a semester, and she was the most wonderful mentor. And many years later, having gone into public librarianship myself, I invited her to my branch at the Daly City Public Library to do a program on immigrants. This was during the Steinbeck program, and she did a wonderful presentation of her poetry at Angel Island, and I'll remember that to this day. She was just a great mentor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ann Cleveland. I'm the executive director of the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, which is the iSchool's largest research center. And I have to say, Judy Young is a really hard act to follow, especially with this audience. but thank you so much for inviting us to help celebrate the birthday of the School of Information with a conversation about information security. And information security may not have been on the radar of the School of Librarianship 104 years ago when it was founded. But I'm going to quote Professor Buckland actually by saying that cybersecurity today, the research agenda actually echoes some of the research concerns of librarianship and bibliography. Even when paper or parchment or papyrus was the medium. So questions like, is this document authentic? What is its origin? Has it been altered? Can it be trusted? And it seems to me that questions about privacy and censorship are also core to the research agenda then as now. So it really is questions about trustworthiness and responsibility. And we see ourselves as a natural evolution of the agenda of the School of Librarianship and the School of Information, just now with different and new digital tools and technologies. I was asked today just to share a little bit about the Center's history and research agenda. So we were founded in 2015. And if you think back to 2015, cybersecurity was really seen as this niche technical subject, kind of in the corner over there, dealing with firewalls and network defense. And our founding faculty director, Steve Weber, had the prescience to say and think, cybersecurity is the master problem of the internet age. It is everything that has to do with the intersection of humans and machines that is important enough to be called security. And we founded the center on those principles. We helped develop the Master of Information and Cybersecurity program, which followed soon after, and I would say soon eclipsed us in its size. And fast forward to 2022, cybersecurity and information security is on the agenda of every Fortune 500 board of directors and on down, and it's seen as a technical challenge embedded in a larger organizational and societal challenge. So I'm going to share just a couple of pillars of our work and give a few examples of each in our research agenda. The first pillar is a focus on the future, and the focus on the future of cybersecurity and where it's headed. Our name, Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity, says it all. But of course, this also means fostering the next generation of future cybersecurity talent. And so since we were founded, we've supported nearly 200 students and postdocs and faculty researchers at Berkeley from 20 plus different departments and academic units, including the School of Information, of course, but also inclusive of cybersecurity researchers in public health and in law and who are studying human rights. The fellows pictured here on this slide are recipients of our most prestigious student support fellowship, the Cal Cybersecurity Research Fellowship, the most recent of which were 5 Mike students, Master of Information and Cybersecurity students, whose project conducted research on reducing the mean time for detection of adversarial data attacks. Another example of our future-focused research is our flagship cybersecurity future scenarios. We've done these every 5 years since the center's founding. So there was a 2020, 2025 edition, and we're just embarking on Cybersecurity Futures 2030. And this project really came out of the insight that cybersecurity, as it is practiced today, works a lot like a hospital emergency room. A problem comes in the door, you patch it up, you send it out, and then you turn to the next fire that's burning on your desk. That there wasn't an institution in the ecosystem that was looking over the horizon 3 to 5 years, trying to help society prepare for the new cybersecurity problems that would be coming down the pike. And so that is the niche that we try to occupy, guided by this question: what are the vital cybersecurity and privacy issues that we would wish we had started working on today if this future comes to pass in 2030? And this audience has the great good fortune to get to hear more about exactly one of those questions from Professor Chris Hoofnagle in a minute on his research on quantum. Another of our flagship initiatives is on AI security. So AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning products are helpful to cyber defenders, of course, but they also aid cyber attackers. And they have security concerns in their own right. For a lot of these AI and machine learning models, we don't know exactly what they're going to do when they're released, quote unquote, into the wild. And so those are the things that our AI security initiative focuses on. And in keeping with something that I think of as very iSchooly, CLTC is dedicated to connecting scholarship with practice. And this is one of those programs where we very much emphasize that our AI security initiative has informed the new AI risk management framework that's coming out of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. We informed the Office of the UC President's AI strategy and have worked with the California Department of Technology on their AI strategy as well. And the fellows that you see here are our inaugural cohort of AI Policy Hub fellows, all selected for the program because of their interest and their skills in both the technology and the policy side. So the last thing I'll mention as a theme in our future-focused research is data practices and privacy at scale. One of the programs that we're most proud of in this initiative is empirical studies of the effects on the ground of economy-wide privacy legislation, like the California Consumer Protection Act. We've created a transatlantic community of researchers who are interested in these questions and really put forth one of the first body of scholarship since these privacy legislation went into effect just a few years ago. So I said that I would talk about two pillars of our work. Complementing the future focus pillar of our work is a pillar to expand who participates in cybersecurity. So part of that, given the overwhelming need, and the data are on the slide for new talent and new professionals in the field, is work that we do on expanding both the size and the diversity and inclusion of the cyber talent pipeline. But this work about expanding who participates in cybersecurity is also about centering questions of, for whom and under what circumstances is cybersecurity used and understood. And I'll give just a couple of examples of what I'm talking about there. Our public interest cybersecurity program pioneered a hands-on cybersecurity clinic that we call the Citizen Clinic. And this is an opportunity for Berkeley students to take a class where they're paired with a real world organization. In the Citizen Clinic's case, we focus on organizations that are at particularly high risk of politically motivated cyber attack. So if you think about reproductive rights organizations or refugee organizations or voter education organizations, and students work with them to strengthen their cybersecurity defenses over the course of the semester in a pro bono consulting model, a lot like law schools will do with the law clinic. It's had an overwhelming response, and it's actually had a couple of benefits that we think of as a win-win. One, the clinic has shown people who might not have thought of cybersecurity as a career that there is a pathway for them in cybersecurity and that it is about serving the community. We're really proud that 40% of our alums from the clinic are women in a field where less than 25% of professionals are women. And then it also fulfills the university's responsibility for public service by strengthening the cyber resilience in our community organizations. We've also launched a national consortium of cybersecurity clinics, pairing up with a handful of other universities around the country and around the world who have these cybersecurity clinics MIT is one, Indiana University, the University of Alabama, and our mission is to have a cybersecurity clinic in every state in the US by 2030, serving every community. And then last on this pillar of expanding who participates in cybersecurity is translating cybersecurity to new audiences. We think of this work as demystifying cybersecurity, if you will. So it includes things like creating threat modeling tools for people who have no experience in cybersecurity. I would encourage everybody here to go to our website and watch our short explainer videos on complex cybersecurity topics, including one featuring the iSchool's own Hani Fareed on deepfakes. And then there's original cybersecurity imagery on the website as well, trying to get away from these cliches of hacker in a hoodie with scrolling ones and zeros behind, and demonstrate that cybersecurity affects all of us and needs broader appeal. So that's the snapshot of our work. All of this is made possible by philanthropic support to the center. And I'm pleased to share that there is also a small but growing and passionate hashtag cyber philanthropy movement. And you are the first to hear an exciting announcement that we have timed for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So as Marty said, you have 3 more days not to share your passport with anybody. That the Hewlett Foundation has offered a matching grant to CLTC where gifts to the center will be matched up to $300,000. So if you've been inspired, we're really excited about this. It's really generous. So if you've been inspired by any of the work that I've been describing, please consider a gift. We've got the website up on the slide, and I'm told that there is an analog version also in your party favors bag, if you prefer an old-fashioned check. But regardless, we want you to engage with the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity and become part of our community. We put a newsletter out bi-weekly. All of our research is published on our website. Our events are on our website. Our next public event is a webinar on November 9th that will share findings from a study that some CLTC researchers have just completed on improving the management of cyber risk in high stakes mergers and acquisitions. So trying to avoid like the Verizon Yahoo deal that went so sideways several years ago. And stay tuned for another event this fall on what it's like at the front lines of cyber defense for reproductive rights organizations and how cyber clinics at universities can help. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can stay and chat afterwards.
How do you respond to people who say they don't care about privacy or that ship has sailed? I've heard that phrase far too often.
That is a good question, and I don't know that I can do it justice. We just, we don't think of cybersecurity and privacy as being opposing forces. We think of them as all under the same umbrella of, again, that intersection of where humans and machines interact that's important enough to be called cybersecurity. Great, thank you. We go over to Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be part of this event. I'm going to thank Dean Hurst for hosting it. And I also want to thank the people who I've worked with here at the School of Information for years. Former Dean Anna Saxenian brought me into the School of Information, and I've been so nicely mentored over the years by the people in this building. So it's really nice to be part of this institution. I wanted to give a quick talk about a book I just published. It's called Law and Policy for the Quantum Age. I really hate the title. I wanted to call it just the quantum age, but the publisher wouldn't let me do it. But they did let me do the Schrodinger's cat joke. So the front has a cat, and the back. I should have carried it through by having a dead cat. But that was too off color.
There is a dead cat, you just can't see it.
Yeah, the dead cat is in the bottom of the box. Yeah, it's not my cat. Why talk to you about this? This is a book that is a classic product of the School of Information. And actually, the whole idea, I got the idea to write this book from a School of Information MIM student, Lily Lynn, who was actually in Anne Cleveland's slides. She was, when a picture of her was in it, she's at Microsoft now. She was my former GSI, and we spent a lot of time talking about cybersecurity and quantum technologies. And she opened my eyes to the field of quantum chemistry. And in fact, through that lens, I started to investigate the field much more deeply and found many intersections to talk about. Why is it relevant to iSchools? Well, it's about information theory. It's about the application of quantum mechanics to information theory. So what does it mean when you can collect information using quantum mechanics, store it, and process it, all using different quantum physics rather than classical physics. But the funny thing about this is we started out, it's a 600-page book, and we started out the book by explaining information theory, and sure enough, Claude Shannon makes an appearance, and so on, but the reviewers hated it. And they made us move the science to the appendix. So we go right into the technology rather than the science. And it's my colleague Hani Farid says, anytime you give a talk, you should just have 3 ideas and end with the big picture. So that's what I'm gonna do. Here are 3 provocative ideas from the book. One is that quantum technologies, and that's what I have QT for, are strategically significant and potentially dangerous. So I can give some examples of this, but it's not all upside, and it's neither is it all dystopia. The public discussion of quantum technologies is too focused on cryptanalysis. In fact, we bet that cryptanalysis, the breaking of encryption with quantum computers, is actually not an economically sensible use of the devices. And it's much harder than presented in the news media. And then finally, I think, as I assess the technology landscape, China is actually ahead of the United States in 2 categories of quantum technologies. So the book is about three categories of quantum technologies: quantum sensing, which is the basis for everything, quantum computing, and then quantum communication. We think China is ahead in quantum communication and in quantum computing. And I'll explain why I think that's the case. I wrote this book with my old friend Simpson Garfinkel, who is a computer scientist from MIT and who constantly tried to neg Berkeley in the book. So there's a war between there's a war in the book between MIT and Berkeley. The good news is that it's open access, and I have the librarians to thank for that. We have an office here at University of California that helps book authors get open access license deals, and they helped me, and they were so easy to work with, and I'm so grateful to them. So the book is full text, is free online forever, well, until the end. And the book is about how one can use quantum technologies for these 3 functions: sensing, computing, communications. We start with sensing because you can't do computing or communications without sensing. That's the underlying technology that's necessary for the other 2. The methods we use, and there's another reason why this is nice school work, we use scenario analysis. So I'm trained as a lawyer, but this book is not about the law. We use scenario analysis, we use economic methods, we use technology readiness levels, and so on to discuss the state of the technology. And then we end with policy issues that are brought up by the technology. So why think about this now? What's exciting about quantum technologies right now is there is literally nation-state competition surrounding their development. So China is investing lots of money in quantum technologies, and so is the European Union. And there are explicit industrial policy goals in China and the European Union to get ahead of the United States by investing in a new technology and essentially leapfrogging. There's some other reasons too. So one is this kind of strategic technology posture. The other is that quantum sensing has important role to play in conflict. So there's more intelligence gathering that one can do with quantum sensing that's important. In particular, quantum sensing is useful for detection, well, is thought to be useful for detection of low observables, stealth fighters and boats and the like. And so one of the arguments we make is that quantum technology is going to bring about a change where intelligence agencies are going to have all their signals intelligence capabilities, but they're increasingly going to rely on measurement and signals and signature intelligence, in part from quantum sensing. So other reasons, many of the fundamental tools to do quantum technologies are now commercially available. So for instance, this little kit here, you can buy this kit for $3,000 and it reproduces an experiment that only existed in a university lab just 20 years ago. And you can just buy it, lasers and all. So that's a real difference. The parts are out there. So why is quantum sensing so important? Well, it allows us to sense magnetic fields, gravimetric fields, and this is actually very interesting, can't shield against gravity, and photonic methods. And I don't want to go through all of these because it can go on forever, but the idea here is that there are magnetic sensing capabilities that will let you do things like detect submarines that are very difficult to detect. There are promising yet not implemented systems that will detect stealth vehicles in the air using photonic sensing. So it's difficult to sense these with traditional radar, but by using photonic methods, one can see objects in the air. And then here's a really killer app. This is actually a Chinese experiment. What they're demonstrating here is by suspending a quantum sensor from a helicopter. So this is an airborne sensor. They can fly this sensor over a field and detect iron balls that are buried in that field, buried below ground. So obviously all the mining companies are very interested in this. There's Schlumberger and so on. We're investing a lot of money in this. But you could use this for landmine detection, detecting tunnels, underground facilities and so on. Very exciting stuff that's happening out there. Quantum computing is what gets all the attention though. Quantum computing is a tremendous technological challenge. It requires a mastery of quantum sensing just to get to it. All the devices out there are still in research device status, and there's some common misconceptions about these technologies. They do not consider all possible solutions. That's frequently said about these devices, but instead, the architecture of these devices allow them to compute using algorithms that take fewer steps. And this sometimes gives a fantastic speed up, and it sometimes just gives a pretty good speed up. So it gives a good speed up for search, but an exponential speed up for some functions like factoring numbers. That's actually where the encryption problem comes. We argue that the real killer app here are boutique devices that simulate physical events. These devices will be used in chemistry and drug synthesis to make new materials, to design new products. And that's how people are going to make billions of dollars. It's actually the positive view of quantum computing. This is not the all encryption is dead view of quantum computing. This is the view that we get better products, we get better batteries, we get better drugs, and so on. It's actually the Feynman view for quantum computing. But there's some downsides to it. It might be a winner-take-all technology, in that if you can build a sufficiently large quantum simulator, the first thing you would do with that device is not crack encryption, but you'd study material science to build an even larger quantum device. And then you could have a takeoff, right? And we explain how that could happen and how the economics could support that. The most performant quantum computer. Arguably, the most performant quantum computer in the world is actually a quantum simulator. It performs a function that has no use, but it does it so quickly that a normal computer would take 10,000 years to do the same function. And this is a device. I have a very high resolution photograph of this device. It's made entirely of American parts. It's made from Thor labs. Those of you who are in physics labs probably used Thor. It's an air table with a laser with lasers and hundreds of thousands of dollars of Thor labs parts, and it is the most performant computer in the world. And it was built by a fantastic Chinese investigator, Professor Pan. So we're doing a lot out there to argue that we shouldn't spend time worrying about encryption. We have technical reasons and economic reasons why we think quantum computers will not be used for this purpose by most users. Governments will do it, but commercial entities won't. And the reason why is you won't be able to make a lot of money doing this, breaking encryption keys. And number two, we could just regulate it. We could literally say, if you break your competitor's encryption in order to steal their secrets, it's an unfair trade practice. There's plenty of examples of things like that. You'll make a lot more money by working in quantum chemistry and quantum material science. And there's also countermeasures. So we've released in Lawfare, we have an essay discussing this in much greater detail. And in deference to Professor Fareed, I'll end with my big open questions. One is how do we stay ahead in the US? One of the answers we give to this is liberalized immigration policy. That no actor in quantum technology has an all-American team. These are intensely international teams that require exquisite expertise. And no one nation, not even China, can produce the people necessary to in-house this talent. So one answer we have is immigration. One of the most important questions in the government is there a viable export control strategy? Are there things we could do to help America to help us get ahead, at least in the short term, through export controls? There are some strategies, but they're quite nuanced. And they ultimately, if you implement them, they can become perverse. They might work for 5 years, but they don't work for 10, for instance. Space is really important. One can do more with quantum sensing in space than you can do on the planet. So the nations that have launch capability are super important. And you can see nations like India are pairing their space program with their quantum programs. There's an obvious reason. You get these sensors into space, and you can do things that you can't do on the ground that are strategically important. Here's an example: detecting whether an object on the ground is a decoy or a real tank is a type of application that you might do from space. Very difficult to do otherwise. And then finally, one of the big questions we're all working on, all the scientists here at Cal and elsewhere are looking to refine quantum sensing and other quantum measures. Well, a big question is going to be what countermeasures are available. And we want countermeasures because, for instance, if certain nations develop sonar systems based on quantum technologies, they will be able to detect our submarines. And this will have implications that are pretty terrible. So there's always countermeasures, but it's unclear what those are going to be. And I think we're behind the curve on what those countermeasures are. So I'll leave it at that, and I'll see if anybody has any questions. The book's online if you want to check it out.
From the legal space, I figure you're great for this question. So if you were to describe quantum technologies to a high schooler or somebody who's a non-technical person interested in entering the space, how would you describe like just the basic idea and how it's different from professional?
We spent so much time on that challenge. If you look at our book, we wrote it so that you only have to read, literally, you only have to read the introduction to understand the whole book. I spent more time on the introduction than any chapter. But then our first chapter explains the underlying quantum mechanics principles as easily as we can. We talk about coin flips and the observability of coin flips as a classical issue where there is uncertainty versus quantum analogs, and so on. So we use a series of metaphors to explain the underlying principles of the technology. And that chapter is only like 10 pages. And we realized we had to do this because when we first organized the book with the science up front, there was math in it. And the reviewers just totally were angry. And but we do explain it much more deeply as well. What we found is that for lawyers and policymakers, they don't actually need to understand the technology. They just need to understand what it can do. Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks.
You talked about quantum sensing. I think you showed a helicopter dragging around a sensor that will detect iron balls. It's very different. Are there any actual products that are currently commercially available that will do this quantum sensing?
So one analogous technology is the devices that detect radiation at the border would be an analogous technology. Those I'm trying to remember exactly how they work, but they're detecting emissions characteristic of dirty bombs and other radiologic material. And at the border, sometimes you see them, huge rectangle that people drive the truck through. That's an example of one that's out there used by nation states. You can also use them at like junkyards when people are throwing away material that might be radioactive. Let me think about this. There are now, including people in Berkeley who are developing methods to measure gravity that are so small that they could be mounted on UAVs. And so when the technology gets that small, you tend to see it show up in the commercial sector. And it becomes very hard to export control.
So you suspect that there won't be a quantum microcomputer anytime?
No, the strategy here will be to build a cloud device, because then you get to keep your engineering secret. Currently, these are very large devices. They almost all of them require super cooling. And so that's not just normal cooling, but actually cooling down to millikelvin level. So that's why you see the blankets and so on. Ultra pure metals. One of the funny like inside ball things out there is that if you look, there's this picture of Google's CEO with their Google's quantum computer, and he's touching. No, these are not devices you can touch. The metals are so pure and so clean. These are all research devices. So for instance, this Chinese device is, this is on an air table. So it's about 5 feet wide. So when they work on this, they actually have a scaffold that they lie upon. That's how big and unwieldy these devices are. Now, there's very interesting competitors out there who have smaller devices that are performant and pretty resilient. A great example is Honeywell. So there are approaches that don't require as much cooling. Honeywell, Raytheon are pursuing those, but these are still very small devices.
I suspect it will be like nuclear programs.
That's
state-directed, state-regulated.
This is what's so interesting, is that we can't, this is not the Manhattan Project, it's something else. Because the underlying components are often commercially available and affordable, companies, even startups, can build these devices. So here in Berkeley, there's a famous startup that has rudimentary quantum computers, and they built those with, I have the figures in my book, but they built it for like in the small millions. So this is not Oppenheimer. This is something very different. Sarah.
You mentioned that this computer in particular does one function. I don't know if I missed what that function was.
Boson sampling. So it is measuring the likelihood of paths of light through these series of lenses. So the question is how can you link these physical processes to some type of computing? Now, there's a company called D-Wave that has figured out how to do this with a certain type of quantum device called a quantum annealer. And there's certain problems they can solve using their annealer. But what's interesting about it is that they can't solve any problem faster than a specialized optimizer. So the various optimization computers out there are still more performant. Yeah.
In your conclusion, you're proposing a means of addressing the US, how do we get ahead, how do we manage export control and such, and that's, your recommendation is pretty, controversial and somewhat counterintuitive and the opposite of, where the industry is headed in terms of R&D. So have you done some litmus testing? What's the general feedback? I assume you've done some socialization around this.
Oh yeah, I didn't really explain why the technology is dangerous, but the quantum simulation could be used for weapons development, so biological or chemical development. So it's interesting that there are groups out there who think the most important ethical issue underlying this technology is its broad use throughout the world. Simpson and I come out to something very different, that there's actually all sorts of people you don't want to have this technology. So yeah, it's a very different take than others. We see all sorts of applications that could be quite troublesome.
So how do we develop more of an open international approach?
Oh, well, I'm hoping that they come to the US. There's very skilled centers of excellence in this in the Netherlands and Germany. Germany is spending hundreds of millions of dollars essentially to create a boutique accelerator. It's estimated that China has spent somewhere in the billions. Some people say 20. I think it's less than 10. It depends on how you count. Currently, there's more money in the field than people in the US. Because President Trump basically opened up the spigot for this funding, and President Biden has carried that through.
So actually, that leads to my question very well. That's what I put. There's a lot of money in this space, even in the US. My question is, what from China is ahead? And my follow-up question is, how do you bridge that gap? It seems like we have companies and institutions and startups working on this in silos. I mean, is there a way to bring it together other than making it state sponsored, like in China, in the Netherlands, and Germany? What else can we do other than opening up immigration policy?
I think so. I think the American model is one that can work. I mean, the way we are spreading the money is through the labs, the Department of Energy labs. So they essentially will organize the release of this money. It's a lot of money. There is a center, one of the centers that was funded is here at Berkeley. So we're one of the few centers that have gotten, or who are part of that effort. And there is significant private sector money. One of the things I did for this book is I went and looked at every VC, every startup and every VC. So every executive, manager, and VC funder of a pure quantum company, and there's a lot of money going in the field. So it's there. I think it's mainly a talent gap. The skills one needs to do this work are many, and it's not just software engineering. It's the type of engineering you see in scientific labs, aligning lasers and so on. So it requires many different disciplines.
And just not as a country, we are not organized enough to put all these diverse topics together.
There was a funding slump in basic research under President Obama, and I think we're seeing the price of that. And so I think there was a belief that the private sector would pick that up, and we need to reverse that trend.
Do you know of any applications for quantum entanglement?
Oh, yes, there's lots. And in fact, this is what the first chapter explains is uncertainty and entanglement. One of the underlying ideas here in creating a quantum computer would be entangling the actual compute device. So there's going to have to be we will have to be able to master entanglement in order to make those types of devices work. There's many different types of devices, so this is just one example. And there's really exciting things going on in communications. At TU Delft in the Netherlands, they've done some of the most, they've done the state of the science work on entangling particles at a distance. Really exciting stuff you can read in Science and Nature. So thanks everyone, that was great. Thanks.